Silas Ford stepped out of the matte black Range Rover, his Italian leather shoes crunching softly on the gravel of the city shelter's driveway. He tugged off his sunglasses and scanned the modest brick building in front of him, unimpressed but curious. This whole thing had been his assistant's idea, a PR move to soften his image after the board accused him of being too cold in interviews. Donate some supplies, shake a few hands, smile for the camera. Easy. Let's make it quick, Silas muttered to the driver, who nodded and opened the trunk where boxes of blankets, canned goods, and toiletries were stacked. The second he stepped through the front doors, the smell of warm soup and bleach hit him, along with the low hum of voices and the clatter of dishes. He was halfway through preparing a polite smile when she appeared. "Hi. You must be Mr. Ford." "I'm Rowan Tate," she said, brushing a loose curl behind her ear as she walked toward him. "Thank you for the donation. It means a lot." Silas was used to fake politeness. What he wasn't used to was a smile like that, genuine, open, and so warm it knocked the wind out of him for a second. He extended his hand. "Silas. And it's nothing, really." Rowan's hand was smaller than his, calloused from work, her grip firm. She tilted her head, eyes searching his face for something. "You don't look like a guy who does this often." He raised a brow. "That obvious, huh?" She laughed. "Kind of. But you're here. That's what matters." Silas didn't know what it was, maybe the way her eyes lit up when she smiled or the calm steadiness in her voice, but something about her made the room feel less performative. It felt real, which wasn't something he experienced very often. "I can give you a quick tour if you want," Rowan offered, already turning toward the hallway. "We've got the kitchen, sleeping quarters, and a common area. It's not much, but it's home to a lot of people." He followed her, listening as she pointed out the things they needed more of, talked about the volunteers, and described the small victories that kept her going, like helping a mother find an apartment or getting someone into rehab. "You run this place?" he asked as they passed a mural painted by the kids. She nodded. "Yeah. I started volunteering here in college. When the last director left, I just stayed." He paused, watching her tuck a blanket around a little boy napping on one of the couches. She wasn't just running the place, she was living it. "You love it," he said. Rowan looked over her shoulder. "I do. It's hard, but it matters." There was no pity in her voice. No self-righteousness. Just quiet determination. He found himself following her into a tiny, cluttered office where a desk sat buried under papers and a corkboard was covered in photos and notes. "You do everything from here?" he asked, scanning the room. "Mostly. I fix sinks, cook dinner, chase kids, file taxes. Whatever needs doing." He let out a low whistle. "You ever sleep?" Rowan grinned. "Not really." Silas leaned against the doorframe, watching her type something into the ancient-looking desktop. "Let me help." She paused. "With what?" "I don't know. Anything. I've got time." Rowan looked him over again. "You're serious?" He shrugged. "I didn't get where I am by pretending." She studied him for a beat, then smiled again. "All right, Mr. Ford. Let's see if you can handle dish duty." He rolled up his sleeves. 2 hours later, Silas was elbow-deep in sudsy water beside Rowan, his designer shirt damp, his tie long gone. She'd given him grief for how slow he moved at first, but now they worked in rhythm, bumping elbows, laughing when he nearly dropped a slippery plate. "You're not bad at this," she said, handing him a rinsed bowl. "Don't sound so surprised. You just don't strike me as the domestic type." He grinned, flicking a bit of water at her. "I'm full of surprises." She gave him a playful glare, then turned back to the sink. "So, what do you actually do, Silas?" He hesitated for a second. Most people already knew, but she didn't seem to, and for some reason he liked that. "I own a tech company, Ford Dynamics. We build software infrastructure for hospitals, logistics, that kind of thing." Rowan blinked. "Wait, you're that Silas Ford?" He nodded slowly. She laughed, clearly stunned. "I thought you were just some donor with a fancy name." He chuckled. "I get that a lot." "Well, that explains the car, and the shoes, and the fact that your watch probably costs more than our monthly food budget." Silas glanced at his wrist and shrugged. "Fair enough." Rowan shook her head, still smiling. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." He didn't mean to say it out loud, but it slipped out and suddenly the air between them shifted just slightly but enough that they both noticed. Rowan looked at him, her expression softer now. Well, thanks for not being a jerk about it. He laughed. I try. By the time he left, it was dark. Rowan walked him to the door, her arms crossed against the chill. You didn't have to stay that long. I wanted to, he said honestly. She looked at him for a moment, then reached into her pocket and handed him a small, folded thank you card. The kids made this. Thought you might like it. He opened it. Crayon drawings of stick figures and hearts filled the inside. His name was spelled wrong, but it made him smile. Thanks, he said quietly, tucking it into his coat. Rowan nodded, her gaze lingering on his face. You're welcome back anytime. Silas hesitated. What if? I wanted to come back just to see you. She blinked, caught off guard. You'd still have to do the dishes. He laughed, then stepped closer. Fair trade. Their eyes held for a second too long before she looked away, cheeks flushed. Good night, Silas. He didn't say anything, just turned and walked back to his car, the card still in his hand and her smile burned into his mind. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about meetings or mergers or profits. He was thinking about a girl with tired eyes and a heart too big for one building. And he couldn't wait to see her again. Silas hadn't planned on returning so soon. But 4 days after his visit to the shelter, he found himself standing in front of the same brick building, holding 2 large boxes stacked with brand new school supplies. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the sky overhead was a pale, bruised gray. He didn't tell anyone at Ford Dynamics he was skipping the morning's executive meeting. For once, he didn't care. Rowan was crouched outside by the garden bed near the entrance, tugging weeds from the soil with gloved hands. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and there was a smear of dirt on her cheek. She looked up, startled, then stood, brushing off her knees. Her eyes flicked to the boxes in his arms. You're back, she said, not quite surprised, but not expecting him either. And heavily armed. Figured the kids could use some notebooks that weren't missing pages, he said, shifting the boxes. And maybe markers that haven't dried out. That's generous of you. She stepped aside and held the door open for him. Come on. You can drop them in the rec room. The shelter buzzed with a different kind of energy today. Children crowded the common area, some working on crafts at folding tables, others sorting through donated clothes for what Rowan called their back-to-school day. A few older teens were helping set up a makeshift supply station, their laughter echoing against the walls. You didn't tell me it was going to be this busy, Silas said, carefully setting the boxes on a plastic table. You didn't ask, Rowan replied, pulling off her gloves. We do a supply drive every August. Try to give every kid here something new to start the school year with. She opened one of the boxes and pulled out a stack of sketch pads. These are perfect. Elijah's been trying to draw comics with the backs of cereal boxes. I hope he likes the charcoal pencils, Silas said. Rowan looked at him, her expression unreadable. You remembered his name. He nodded. I remember a lot more than you think. Before she could respond, a small girl with braids ran up and tugged at Rowan's shirt. Miss Rowan. Miss Rowan. You said we could paint today. We are, sweetheart. I just have to finish up here. She turned to Silas. Can you give me 5 minutes? He nodded, but before she could leave, he reached into his coat pocket and fished out a folded sheet of paper. I almost forgot. I brought this for you. Rowan unfolded it and blinked. A check. For $20,000. Consider it a grant. I figured you could use more than just notebooks and glue sticks. She stared at the paper like it might vanish. Silas, I don't even know what to say. Then don't. Just use it. Rowan swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edges. You didn't have to do this. I know, he said simply. She looked up at him then, and something in her eyes shifted, something quieter and deeper than gratitude. But she didn't say anything else. She just nodded and walked off to join the kids. Silas stayed the rest of the afternoon, helping organize supplies and playing a very chaotic game of freeze tag that ended with him getting tackled by a 7-year-old named Diego. By the time the last child was picked up or tucked into a cot for a nap, the shelter had settled into that rare afternoon hush. Rowan was wiping down the tables in the rec room when he found her again, a tired slump in her shoulders. "You always stay this late?" he asked, leaning against the wall. She tossed the rag into a bucket and exhaled. "Comes with the job. Most days I don't even notice the time. You should take a break." She gave a soft laugh. "And do what? Jet off to Monaco?" "I was thinking more like dinner." Rowan straightened. "Dinner?" He nodded. "There's a place downtown. Quiet. Good food. You deserve a night off." She hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the hallway. "I don't know." "It's not an obligation," he said quickly. "You can say no." Rowan studied him, as if trying to decipher his motive. "You're not doing this because you feel sorry for me, right?" "Not even a little." After a moment's pause, she gave him a small, cautious smile. "All right, but only if you swear it's not one of those places where the appetizer costs more than my rent." "No promises," he said. They left the shelter just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The restaurant was nestled in a quiet corner of the city, away from the usual gloss of Ford's world. Dark wood, low lighting, and the kind of ambience that made you lower your voice without realizing it. Silas had called ahead, of course. Their table was waiting by the window. Rowan slid into the seat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "This is nicer than I expected. You thought I'd take you to a steakhouse with gold leaf on the mashed potatoes?" "Something like that." Silas motioned for the server, who brought 2 glasses of wine without asking. Rowan raised a brow. "You ordered for me? I had a feeling you'd like the Cabernet." She sniffed it, then took a sip. "Okay, I'll give you that one." They ordered. Rowan chose a grilled trout with wild rice. Silas went with the lamb. The conversation drifted easily, surprisingly so. She told him about her first year volunteering at the shelter, about a woman named Cecily who taught her how to fix plumbing with duct tape and prayer. He told her about the first time he pitched software to a hospital board and nearly passed out from nerves. "You don't seem like someone who gets nervous," she said. "I didn't used to, but then the stakes got higher. Now I just hide it better." She tilted her head. "So why keep doing it? You've already made your money. I like building things, making systems work. I can't explain it, it's like fitting puzzle pieces together until something clicks." Rowan nodded slowly. "That makes sense." He studied her in the candlelight. There was something about the way she held herself, like she was always bracing for something to fall apart, but determined to hold it together anyway. "What about you?" he asked. "Why haven't you left? You could work for a nonprofit, run a bigger operation, get a higher salary." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because every time I think about leaving, I remember what it felt like to sleep in my car." He didn't speak. He just let her keep going. "My mom and I were homeless for 3 months when I was 13. We bounced between shelters, couch surfed. That kind of thing sticks with you. So no matter how hard it gets, I stay. Because someone stayed for me." Silas reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "I'm glad you did." The moment held. Neither of them moved. Then the waiter returned with dessert menus and the spell broke. They shared a creme brulee, laughing when Rowan stole the last bite. When he walked her to her door, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. "I had a good time," she said, standing on the top step. "Me too," he said. "Let's do it again." Rowan hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "We'll see." She closed the door, and Silas stood there for a long moment, one hand in his pocket, the other brushing the spot where her lips had been. It wasn't just her smile that had enchanted him anymore. It was everything. The rain returned the following week, not in soft, romantic drizzles, but in sheets that lashed the windows of the shelter like they were being punished. Rowan stood in the office, watching water race down the glass, her phone pressed to her ear. "No, I understand," she said, her tone clipped. "But you said they'd be here by Tuesday. The kids start school on Monday." A pause. Her fingers tapped the edge of the desk. I get that logistics are tricky, but we budgeted for those uniforms. If we don't get them, she stopped herself. Fine. I'll figure it out. She hung up and dropped into her chair, rubbing her temples. The office was too quiet, too tight. The storm rattled the window panes like fists. A knock made her look up. Silas stood in the doorway, his hair damp. The cuffs of his coat darkened from rain. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said without sugarcoating it. "The uniform shipment's delayed. Again. And we don't have enough extras on hand. I've got 27 kids and 15 sets of clothes." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "How late is the shipment?" "They won't say. Could be a few days. Could be next week." Silas pulled out his phone. "What sizes do you need?" Rowan blinked. "What are you doing?" "Solving it." His fingers moved fast. "Give me a list. I'll call someone." She stood, crossing her arms. "Silas, I can't let you keep bailing us out every time something goes wrong." "I'm not bailing you out," he said. "I'm investing in something that matters." She didn't answer right away. The storm outside roared louder, thunder cracking like a warning. Finally, she exhaled and reached for the clipboard on the filing cabinet. "You're impossible, you know that?" He took the list from her. "That's what they said in business school, too." By noon, a delivery van pulled up outside. Boxes of new clothes sorted, labeled, and folded were carried inside by two drenched workers. The kids squealed when they saw the bright colors and new tags. Rowan stood by the window watching them tear into the boxes, her arms wrapped around herself. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly to Silas, who was beside her. "I know," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Elijah hold up a windbreaker like it was made of gold. "Come to the fundraiser tonight," Rowan said suddenly. He turned to her. "What fundraiser?" "We hold one every September. Silent auction, quick speeches, some dancing. Nothing fancy." "Where is it?" "Civic Center." "It's not my usual crowd, but we need the money. Badly." Silas raised an eyebrow. "You want me to blend in with city councilmen and retired teachers? I want you to see what it looks like when people care without needing a camera pointed at them." He gave her a long look. "What time?" 6. "Text me the address." She hesitated. "Don't show up in a three-piece suit. You'll scare away the donors." He grinned. "Noted." He arrived at 6:30. Rowan was standing at the edge of the community room, her dress simple and elegant, navy with capped sleeves and a modest neckline. Her hair was down, curling slightly at her shoulders. She wasn't wearing heels, just flats, the kind you could chase a toddler in and still stand for 5 hours. Her hand was clutching a clipboard as she scanned the room, her brow furrowed. Silas walked up behind her. "You look like someone just bid $10 on a $300 gift basket." She turned and let out a breath. "You're late." Fashionably, he said, offering his arm. Rowan didn't take it, but she didn't walk away either. The room buzzed with quiet conversation and the clink of forks against mismatched china. The decorations were homemade streamers, paper lanterns, and a banner that read "Hope Grows Here" in painted letters. It was nothing like the galas Silas was used to, but there was something about the earnestness of it that made it feel more alive. "I didn't expect you to actually come," Rowan said as they moved through the crowd together. "You invited me. I also told you not to wear a three-piece suit." He looked down at his open-collar shirt and blazer. "This is me compromising." She smiled. "You're impossible." One of the volunteers, a wiry woman with bright red glasses, approached them with a clipboard. "Rowan, you're up." Rowan groaned. "I hate speeches." "You wrote it," the woman said. "Doesn't make it easier." She turned to Silas. "Don't judge me. I'm already impressed." Rowan stepped up to the podium. The chatter quieted. A few people straightened in their seats. Silas found himself watching her, not the way her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone or how she cleared her throat before speaking, but the way her voice, once steady, began to fill the room. "We started this shelter in a building with no heat and a leaky roof," she began. "There were 5 beds and 3 volunteers. Most nights we turned people away. Some days, we didn't know if we'd have enough food. She looked out over the crowd. But we stayed. Because when you've been at the bottom, you know how much it matters to have someone who won't walk away. Her words hung in the stillness. Even the kids in the back were quiet. We've come a long way. But we still have a long way to go. When she stepped down, the applause was warm and immediate. Silas met her at the foot of the stage. You didn't stutter once, he said. She looked up at him. I practiced in the mirror for an hour. Still counts. They moved to the auction tables where people were bidding on everything from hand-knit scarves to donated yoga classes. Silas picked up a bidding sheet for a weekend cabin rental. You thinking of taking up hiking? Rowan teased. He glanced at her. Maybe, if you're the one dragging me through the woods. Before she could reply, an older man approached gray-haired, with a pressed shirt and a tight smile. Rowan, he said, extending his hand. Glad to see you again. She stiffened. Senator Alden. Thanks for coming. Always happy to support the cause. His gaze slid to Silas. And this must be the man behind the recent, generous donations. Silas shook his hand. Silas Ford. The senator's eyes narrowed slightly. Of course. Ford Dynamics. I hear your board's been making waves lately. Silas held his gaze. Only the useful kind. Rowan cleared her throat. We appreciate the support, Senator. Of course. He turned his attention back to Silas. Just be careful. Money's a powerful tool. But it doesn't always buy trust. He walked away, leaving a silence behind him. Well, Silas said. That was subtle. Rowan exhaled. He's been circling the shelter for months. Wants to turn the property into condos. I keep saying no. Then keep saying it. Her eyes searched his. How do you do that? What? Act like nothing rattles you. He paused. Because everything used to. She didn't press. But something shifted between them again, not flirtation, not tension, but something more fragile. Something that might break if they named it too soon. When the night ended, Silas walked her to her car. The lot was nearly empty, the lanterns inside flickering as volunteers cleaned up. You did good tonight, he said. She leaned against the door. I'm exhausted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. She blinked. What's that? Something I saw and thought of you. He opened it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple, understated, with a tiny star-shaped charm at the clasp. Rowan didn't move. I'm not trying to make a statement, he said. I just wanted you to have it. She took it slowly, turning it in her fingers. It's beautiful. I thought it looked like something you'd wear. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, softly, why are you doing this? He leaned closer. Because every time I walk away from you, I want to come back. Rowan didn't respond, but she reached out and took his hand. And for Silas, that said more than words ever could. The shelter was unusually quiet for a Saturday afternoon. Most of the kids were out on a group trip to the Science Museum, and the volunteers had taken the rare chance to deep clean the kitchen and reorganize supplies. Rowan stood on a metal ladder in the back storage room, trying to wrestle a dusty fan box from the top shelf. Silas stepped into the doorway, took one look at her wobbly stance, and strode forward. Rowan, you're going to fall and break something you actually need to walk on. She glanced down, annoyed and amused. It's a fan, not a safe. He reached up and took the box from her hands with ease. You say that like it's not covered in 5 years of dust and regret. She climbed down, brushing her palms on her jeans. You didn't text. I was in the neighborhood. You live in a penthouse 30 minutes from here. I took the long way. She narrowed her eyes but didn't press. You're avoiding something. Silas gave a noncommittal shrug. Maybe. Rowan crossed her arms. What happened? He hesitated, then leaned against the wall. The board called an emergency meeting yesterday. They want to acquire a failing competitor. Merge portfolios, consolidate operations, push into new territory. Sounds smart. It is. But they also want to cut 2 of our smaller divisions to make room. She frowned. And you don't. They're the ones that helped me start all this. Loyalty means something to me, even if it doesn't to shareholders. Rowan tilted her head. So what are you going to do? Silas looked at her, and for a moment his expression was stripped of every layer of charm and confidence. I honestly don't know. She didn't offer a solution. Instead, she stepped closer and took the fan box from his hands. Then take the weekend to figure it out. You don't make your best choices when you're exhausted. Is that a medical opinion? It's a human one. He followed her as she carried the box to the office, setting it down beside a pile of other forgotten donations. He looked around. The walls were newly painted, the bulletin board organized, the windows scrubbed clean. The shelter felt different, brighter, more focused. And he realized it was because Rowan had finally allowed him to help, not just with money but with presence. Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing if life had gone differently? He asked. Rowan leaned against the desk. All the time. But then I remember that if I hadn't ended up here, I wouldn't have met you. Silas didn't respond right away. Then softly, neither would I. They stood in the quiet, the soft hum of the building the only sound between them. I'm not going to let them gut the company, he said suddenly. If I lose my position, fine. But I'm not trading people for profit. Rowan nodded. That's the man I know. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He smiled, then glanced down at the bracelet she wore. It caught the light in a way that made the tiny star shimmer. I have something for you. Rowan groaned. If it's another bracelet, I'm going to start thinking you're trying to build me a jewelry box. No, he said, reaching into his jacket. It's this. He held out a folded envelope. She took it, brows furrowed, and opened it. Inside was a deed. Her name was printed clearly across the top. What is this? She asked, her voice low. It's the building next door, he said. The one that's been empty for years. I bought it from the city this morning. It's yours now. She stared at him, stunned. Silas, that building is massive. And structurally sound. You can triple the number of beds, add classrooms, maybe even a medical center. I'll help with the renovations, but it's under your name. You control it. She looked up, eyes wide. You're serious. I've never been more. Rowan lowered the paper, her expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? Because you've spent your entire life giving everyone else a place to belong. I thought maybe for once someone should give you the same. Her throat moved as she swallowed. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he interrupted. You changed the way I see the world, Rowan. You reminded me what matters. She looked at him, eyes searching. You really mean that? He nodded. I didn't expect it. I didn't plan it. But I fell for you, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. The silence stretched again, but this time it vibrated with something electric and new. You want to come by tomorrow? She asked finally, voice soft. We're painting the new art room. Could use someone tall. I'll bring brushes. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. And maybe dinner? I've got a chef who owes me a favor. That doesn't count as cooking. I'll light the candles myself. That earned a laugh, low and real. As the sun dipped lower through the window, casting gold across the floor, Rowan leaned up and kissed him. Not a brush of lips, but something sure and steady. When she pulled back, she whispered, I'm glad you came to the shelter that day. I never really left, he said. The next few weeks moved fast. The new building was approved for renovations. Contractors were scheduled. Rowan assembled a task force of volunteers, donors, and community leaders. Silas showed up every weekend, traded his usual suits for jeans, helped patch walls and install lighting. He didn't flinch when a pipe burst and soaked them both in freezing water. He didn't complain when the electricity went out mid-painting and they had to finish by flashlight. He even learned how to make grilled cheese. But it wasn't just what he did. It was how he listened when Rowan vented, how he stepped back when she needed to lead, how he never once tried to take credit. She had dated men before, but none had ever made her feel like she could fall apart and be held without being fixed. One evening, after everyone had gone home, they stood in the middle of the new art room. The walls were painted a soft sage green. Sunlight spilled through the large windows, catching on the drying canvases and the play of shadows. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Rowan froze. You promised no more bracelets. It's not a bracelet. He opened the lid. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant. A single diamond set into a platinum band. I've built empires, he said, voice steady. I've made money, lost it, made it again. But none of it meant anything until I met you. Rowan's breath caught. You taught me how to be human again. And I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of man who deserves you. He dropped to one knee. Marry me, Rowan Tate. She stared down at him, lips parted, hands trembling slightly. Then she smiled and nodded. Yes. He stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and kissed her until the world fell away. They didn't rush a wedding. They didn't need to. They spent the next 6 months building something better than either had ever imagined, a home not just for others, but for themselves. The shelter expanded, the programs flourished. Kids painted murals on the new walls. The city finally took notice. And on a spring morning, beneath a canopy of white blossoms in a quiet garden behind the shelter, Rowan walked towards Silas in a dress that flowed like water and eyes that held every promise she'd ever made. He waited for her, not in a tuxedo, but in the same shirt he wore the first day she met him. Because the man she fell in love with didn't need polish. He just needed to be real. They said their vows surrounded by laughter, tears, and the children whose futures they'd changed. And when Silas leaned in to kiss his wife, he whispered against her lips, "Thank you for your smile." And she whispered back, "Thank you for seeing it." The first time Silas forgot a meeting, his assistant nearly had a panic attack. "You never forget. Ever," Dana had said, pacing outside his office while he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching clouds roll in over the skyline. "Are you sick? Dying? Secretly on vacation?" "I'm fine," he'd replied, distracted. But the truth was, something had shifted in him. Not in a chaotic, sudden way, but gradually, like the tide pulling away from the shore, revealing what had always been buried beneath the waves. The meeting still mattered. His company still mattered. But it no longer consumed him. It was Rowan's doing. Without speeches, without pressure, she'd changed the rhythm of his life. He found himself waking early, not to check stocks, but to help her carry crates into the new building. He'd memorized the names of the teenagers running the mentoring program she'd launched last month. And for the first time in years, Sunday mornings weren't spent scanning news reports, they were spent tangled in bedsheets and sunlight, listening to Rowan hum while she watered the plants on their balcony. The world hadn't stopped spinning. But his had. And it had found a new center. Now, 2 months after the quiet, perfect wedding in the garden, they were finally catching their breath. The shelter was operating at full capacity with a waiting list already forming for the new housing program they'd launched. Rowan had hired a full-time administrative director, which meant she could finally delegate something other than plumbing repair and tax filing. For the first time in years, she let herself think bigger. Which was how she ended up presenting at the statewide Nonprofit Leaders Summit, an event she'd once considered out of her league. But now, standing behind a podium in a ballroom filled with donors, politicians, and nonprofit executives, she spoke with the same quiet fire that had once stopped Silas in his tracks the very first time he met her. Silas watched from the back of the room, arms folded, eyes fixed on her. She wore a deep green silk dress and low heels that made her look commanding and grounded all at once. Her voice carried across the room, not loud but clear, anchored. "We don't need to save people," she said. "We need to remind them they're already worth saving." When she stepped off the stage, a standing ovation followed. She flushed, clearly unused to applause, and made her way toward the exit with her head down. Silas met her halfway, catching her hand gently. "You left everyone speechless," he murmured, guiding her to the hallway. "I was shaking the whole time," she whispered. "Could you tell? You looked like you were running the room." "Liar. Only when it's for a good cause." She leaned into him, her forehead brushing his shoulder. He kissed her hair. Back at the hotel suite, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the velvet couch. Silas loosened his tie, pouring 2 glasses of wine from the bottle waiting on the bar. "You still hate public speaking?" he asked, handing her a glass. "No. I still hate heels. And small talk. And buffets. He raised a brow. You charmed half the donors in that room. I was mostly trying not to throw up on them. He laughed softly, then sat beside her. You're not playing small anymore. She took a sip of wine. I don't want to. Not when we have the chance to change things in a real way. You're not just running a shelter anymore, Rowan. You're leading a movement. She looked at him, something unreadable crossing her face. Does that scare you? Why would it? Because this used to be your world. The spotlight, the strategy, the constant pressure. I'm stepping into it now, and I don't want to lose what we have. Silas took the glass from her hand and set it down. Come here. She slid onto his lap without hesitation, curling into him. You won't lose me, he said. Not to this. Not to anything. I'm not used to being seen like this. Like someone people listen to. You've always been that person. They're just finally catching up. She smiled, lips pressed against his neck. You're getting good at this. At what? Knowing exactly what to say. I've had a good teacher. They spent the weekend in the city not because they had to but because they wanted to. They walked through art galleries and took photos in front of murals. They danced to a jazz trio in a dimly lit lounge and ate street food on a bench without caring that Silas got mustard on his shirt. They were normal and extraordinary at once. And when they returned home late Sunday night, Rowan found a stack of letters waiting in the mailbox, thank you notes from parents whose children had gotten into school thanks to the tutoring program she'd started. One of them included a hand-drawn picture of a house with a garden and a little girl holding a book. Rowan sat on the kitchen floor, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as she traced the crayon lines. Silas crouched beside her and brushed a thumb under her eye. You okay? She nodded. I used to be that kid. You're the reason she won't have to be. In the months that followed, everything grew. The shelter expanded again, this time to include an after-school center. Silas stepped back from 3 of his company's corporate boards to focus on the foundation they launched together, the Tate Ford initiative, aimed at systemic poverty solutions. They argued sometimes about budget decisions or how to handle logistics, but their fights were never cruel. They were always rooted in passion, not pride. They learned to disagree without shutting down, to apologize without ego, to laugh at everything even when they were tired. One night, after a particularly long day filled with meetings and a broken refrigerator at the shelter, Rowan curled into bed beside Silas, her head on his chest. Can I tell you something weird? She asked. Always. I used to think being in love like this would make me feel smaller, like I'd vanish inside it. And now, I feel bigger, like I'm more myself than ever. He kissed her temple. That's how it's supposed to feel. She looked up at him. Are you happy? I didn't know what that was until you, he said. Now it's just constant. A year passed. They didn't mark it with fanfare. No elaborate trips or parties. Just a quiet dinner in the garden where they'd gotten married, surrounded by string lights and the soft rustle of leaves. They talked about the future, about maybe adopting, about expanding their programs to other cities, about buying a lakeside cottage where they could disappear for a week at a time and pretend the world didn't need them. They didn't need more declarations. Their love had settled into something deeper than words. It was the way Silas still brewed her tea each morning, even when he had to be in meetings by 7. It was the way Rowan still wrote him notes in the margins of her planner, knowing he'd flip through it when she wasn't looking. It was the way they always found each other no matter how chaotic the day got, no matter what the world demanded. They were home. Not in a building. Not in a city. But in each other. That was the love they'd built. And it was everything.